This is an audio short story, No Matter What, by Jim Pope. Read by Quack McMallard. Chapter 1.
No Matter What, Chapter 1. Janet was not a great one for gambling, but for some reason she decided to buy 2 tickets in an art union. Maybe it was the pictures of the children in need that adorned the stall selling the tickets at her local Westfield, or maybe it was a moment of weakness. On the other hand, it could have been a desire for one of the prizes. First prize being a house on the Gold Coast, second prize would be a fancy sports car, and third prize was a holiday through Asia. She didn't need a house on the Gold Coast, or a fancy sports car, and she never showed any interest in travel. So I believe it was the faces of the needy children that led to that purchase. She didn't give the tickets a second thought after she bought them. When she arrived home, she put them in a bowl she kept on her dining room table, just for those types of things: small change, receipts, business cards, and other things of that ilk. A few months passed when she received a text message from the art union, telling her she had won third prize. At first she did not believe it, as she never won any prizes in anything. It sank in when she read her emails and saw the details of her prize. 3 weeks, all expenses paid, holiday through 4 Asian countries. The prize could not be given away or sold to anyone else, so she had 2 options: go on the holiday or not. Holidays in foreign parts were not something that held a great attraction for Janet. She saw them more akin to torture than pleasure. Hotel rooms, different languages, unfamiliar food, all of which filled her with trepidation. She rang her brother to talk it through, but she already knew what he would have to say. Paul was far more of an outgoing person, always up for an adventure and experiencing new places. He told her it was the opportunity of a lifetime, and to grab it with both hands and hold on tight. He pointed out that there would be so much to see and experience that she just had to be brave and go. After a great deal of thought and indecision, she eventually decided to go. This was a step into the unknown for Janet. She was a quiet, retiring person who had never been out of New South Wales, let alone the country. She had never married or done anything that involved risk. She worked as a clerk in a solicitor's office, and if she was not at work, she would be at home with her cat. For her to even think about going on this holiday was unexpected, let alone her decision to actually go. Everyone who knew her were more than surprised to find that she was going, and just about all of them expected her to change her mind and not go. Her work colleagues were even running a book on how many days before the departure date she would change her mind. No one had put money on her going. But go she did. The day came and her brother took her to the airport, and without the slightest hesitation she boarded her flight. She had spent the months leading up to the departure studying the cultures of the countries she would be visiting and interesting places to go. She looked back and waved to her brother, and just for a few seconds he thought he saw total fear on her face, but it was soon replaced with a broad smile. Paul watched her walk away and wondered whether he should have gone with her, but he knew that this was her time to shine and to experience new things. In her 40 years on this planet, Janet had never been on a plane. As it accelerated down the runway, she asked herself the question that she would ask herself many times over the coming weeks, and that was, what am I doing here? She would get used to air travel over the next few weeks, with many more flights in various sorts of aircraft, but she would never get used to the takeoffs. After a long flight, she finally got to her destination. The landing proved to be a little less scary than the takeoff, but the real adventure was the taxi ride to the hotel. Push bikes, motorbikes, cars, trucks, all seemingly going anywhere they wanted, but somehow managing not to hit each other. Janet felt a great sense of relief to be in the hotel room, and a great sense of excitement and fear about what the next day would bring. A new day and the real start to the adventure that she had set for herself. A day of sightseeing of both spectacular natural landscapes and ancient man-made ruins. Today would set the pattern for the weeks to come. She thought herself prepared. She had a translation gadget, as well as a map and some local money. But she still sat on the edge of the bed for some time trying to summon up the courage. After all of her worries, she had an interesting day, without any problems, as many of the locals spoke English, and everywhere she went was an established tourist site, so there was many fellow travellers around. She even found herself striking up conversations with other tourists. So by the time she returned to the hotel, a lot of her apprehensions about this trip were starting to dissipate. 2.5 weeks of looking at natural wonders and ancient ruins was starting to wear a bit thin for Janet, but she thought there was only a few more days before she would be flying home. She was packing in the preparation for today's flight to the last country on her itinerary. Of the 4 countries that made up her holiday, this was the one she would rather not go to. Unlike the countries she had already visited, which at least held a veneer of being free and open societies, this next country was a dictatorship. But it did have a thriving tourist industry, and as long as she didn't wander off the tourist track, all would be well. And anyway, it was only a few days, and there would be some spectacular sights to see. She had only packed a few things when the phone rang. It was the desk clerk, wanting to see her. She made her way down the stairs to see him, only to find him saying that he had not rung her. She took it to be some sort of communication problem. So she asked him to organise a taxi for 1 hour's time and wandered back to her room. While she was away, someone dressed like a hotel maid entered her room and replaced one of her bags with an identical one and carefully partially packed it so it looked like nothing had been disturbed. Janet returned to her room and continued packing. She had become quite good at the whole process of packing and unpacking, being by nature a very organised person. By the time she had finished, it was time to go, so she made her way down to the front of the hotel and the taxi took her to the airport. She found this part of the holiday experience to be no fun at all. In fact, she found it quite stressful. It was too chaotic for her, but she endured it and soon found herself holding the armrest of the plane seat with a vice grip as the plane thundered down the runway. It was only a few hours to her next destination, so it was not long before the plane came in to land. Another part of the holiday experience Janet found a bit of an ordeal was going through customs. She had learnt from this trip to travel light, bringing nothing through customs other than what was necessary. So she only had 2 bags, mostly clothes. Any souvenirs she purchased along the way she posted to herself, so as to keep the luggage down to a manageable amount. But also it made the getting through customs a lot easier. She was lined up waiting her turn when the drug dog was led by. It was a lovely little terrier. She had seen the sign saying, "Don't pet the dogs," but she had to use all of her self-control not to reach down and pat it when it came over and sat at her feet. She had no idea that this was the signal to say it had detected drugs. She was immediately taken to another room, where her bags were searched more closely, where they found a large amount of drugs in the lining of one of the bags. The police questioned her about her movements, her bags, and why she was in this country. All Janet could do was to keep saying she knew nothing about it. She was arrested for drug trafficking and taken to a holding cell, then later transferred to prison. Janet found herself alone in what could only be called hell. Despair and fear overwhelmed her. She sat in the corner of the large cell, which contained about 30 women, in a state of total withdrawal. As she sat there, she could not take it all in. How this could have happened. She cursed the day she bought the tickets in the art union, and her brother for persuading her to go on this holiday. Another prisoner came over and talked to her. She sounded American. She told her that it would be all fine, it would work out, and that they rarely treat foreigners badly, as it would be bad for the tourist industry. They took her away the next day, and Janet never saw her again. It was days before an embassy official came to see her, to tell her that her brother had been informed of her situation, and that legal representation had been arranged. But it was more than obvious that she would not be getting much help from them, as drug dealers was not someone the taxpayers would be helping. Paul came to see her the next day. He had tried to see her the day before, but she was only allowed one visitor per day. But he had seen the lawyer assigned to her. The lawyer thought it was a cut and dried case, that she would be convicted, and the best they could hope for would be life in prison, but the death penalty was a real possibility. They sat looking at each other, at a complete loss as to what to do next. Janet asked about her cat. Paul had to tell her that Colin, the cat, was in a cat home. "So we are both in jail," Janet joked. They both gave a half-hearted laugh. The lawyer had suggested that a bribe to the governor of the prison would help with living conditions. It was not something considered wrong or unethical. It was just part of the way things were done. The lawyer would organise it. All that needed to be done was to pay the lawyer the equivalent of $10,000 Australian. It was so out in the open that it would be done by bank transfer. Paul organised it, but it halved his resources. Paul realised that this would take a lot of money, so he reluctantly headed home with the intent of selling his house to organise a better solicitor. Paul approached the solicitors Janet worked for, and one of them agreed to take on the case for a fee. With his house on the market, he headed back to be with Janet. He could not do anything, but at least he could give her moral support. The court case was just about upon them, when the solicitor took Paul aside to tell him that it was a hopeless case, and to be prepared for the worst. The court was more akin to a skit from Monty Python than a court of law. There was no jury, just a military judge. Everything said by the prosecution was taken as truth, and everything said by the defence was dismissed. It only took a day for Janet to be found guilty and sentenced to death. Janet seemed resolved, but Paul would not give in. He met with the solicitors, both local and Australian, but they said it was hopeless. He asked about an appeal, but they thought it was pointless. He told them to appeal and to take every legal avenue open to them, but the most important thing for them to do was to drag it out as long as possible. The governor of the prison wanted another $10,000 to keep Janet in a better part of the prison, which he was paid. Paul went to see Janet to tell her he would not be able to see her for a while, as he had to go home to raise more money. He told her to be strong, not to give up hope. He impressed on her the need to remain positive and to be ready. He reminded her that he was the big brother and that he always fixed things. Paul flew home and Janet was alone. She would have to be strong to get through this. but she could not see how her big brother could possibly fix this one.
Copyright 2022. To listen to or read more chapters, go to www.yellowduckmotorsport.com. Click on Books, drop-down menu, then click on No Matter What. To listen to more chapters or to read, click on Chapters.